is Chantal, so I am the authorized wildlife custodian at Hobbitstee Wildlife Refuge. That means my name is on all the permits. Hobbitstee Wildlife Refuge is located in Jarvis, and last year we rehabilitated 2,500 animals. This year we've exceeded 3,000 already, and we're not through the year yet. So obviously we are growing. We are an all-volunteer organization. We do not have any full-time staff. I am the only person that works full-time, and I don't get paid for what I do. Our funding predominantly comes from private donations. We have a few corporate sponsors, but it's predominantly private donations. And our staff are predominantly young offenders, at-risk youth, and some adult offenders, and some are there voluntarily, some not. With that being said, Hobbitstee Wildlife Refuge is the main purpose is wildlife rehabilitation. But I once had to describe what I would do in an ideal world. Well, in an ideal world, there would be no wildlife in distress, so we wouldn't be rehabilitating any wildlife. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. The education component is very important to us as well. We're very active in mitigation, and by default, but also it started out by default, but now we do more on-purpose research. So we do research in best management practices for wildlife rehabilitators, but we also contribute a lot of data to various research studies and master theses and so on, because we get all these animals that come in and we collect the data automatically. So my talk tonight is going to be about when wildlife needs a helping hand, but also very much when it doesn't need a helping hand. So with that being said, so the reason I'm here, the reason I do these talks, because I very much want to decrease the suffering of wildlife. In people's needs to help animals, they do horrific things to animals, and horrific is in big capital letters. People, unfortunately, abuse animals very badly when they're trying to help. We definitely need to decrease the number of orphaned, and orphaned is in quotation marks, wildlife, because a lot of the orphans that we see aren't actually orphans. A lot of people, as soon as they realize they have baby squirrels or baby raccoons in their backyard, can't leave them alone, and automatically assume these animals are orphaned. We also really want to increase the survival rate of wildlife. The faster we can get them, the better their chances are. And if we can, in doing so, establish a network of people who are willing and able to help, we rely extraordinarily heavily on our volunteer drivers. The area that we cover is huge. It ranges from Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville to Mississauga, all of the Niagara Peninsula, all of the Norfolk branch, and then Cambridge, Kitchener-Waterloo, Guelph. And then this year we've actually had a lot of wildlife come off the Bruce Peninsula, and we've also had a lot of wildlife from Woodstock in London. So you can see that it's a huge area, and if I had to drive all day long to pick up all the animals, it wouldn't work. So we have a lot of volunteer drivers that spend a lot of time driving wildlife to and from. So one of my big things always is, don't put your life at risk to help wildlife. Do not stop your car on the 401 because there is an animal. If I have to go rescue a wild animal off the 401, I only will do so if I have police assistance. If OPP is not there, closing a lane, making sure that I am safe and that everyone else is safe, I cannot risk my life or somebody else's life for the sake of an animal. When you're assisting a turtle across the road, make sure that it's safe to do so. If it is not, unfortunately, we will have to sacrifice that turtle. We cannot risk people's lives. The other part is all wildlife, if you run some animals through your head, they all have weapons. And sometimes it's not obvious. Some wildlife are very well equipped and have multiple weapons. You know, it's interesting. But if you think about it real quickly, they all have weapons. The other thing that can be a weapon sometimes is wildlife can carry zoonotic diseases. So if you look at the top right picture, hang on, I have a laser, there we go. Bats, of course, there's been a few rabies positive bats. There recently was a gentleman in British Columbia who passed away from rabies because a bat came at him and he brushed it away, and that was enough for him to contract rabies and die. So zoonotic diseases are definitely something that we have to think of. Hamilton being the hot spot for the rabies strain or the raccoon strain outbreak of rabies in the recent years. This is bald eagle talons. Those are my fingers. If a bald eagle is in distress, that's a specialist kind of deal. That generally, even if the SPCA people are on site, they generally will call in myself or somebody else who is a specialist at handling these animals because they are extraordinarily dangerous. This is not a native species turtle. This is actually an alligator snapping turtle that lives at our house. But I thought the picture was give a pretty good indicator as to why you really don't want to stick your fingers in there. The bite power would be similar for a common snapping turtle that we have in Ontario. This one, I can speak from experience here. After 10 years of being a wildlife rehabilitator and never really getting hurt, last year I got bitten by the same beaver not once but twice on two separate occasions. Both times required a lot of sutures. So those teeth are massive and they pack a good punch. They also have a tail that they can beat you with, and they have tremendously sharp nails. So beaver is one of those multiple weapon kind of animals. Plus, if you look at a beaver, they're really kind of roundish. They're very difficult to find a good spot to grab them from. There's a few, raccoon is another animal that doesn't have a good handle if you need to hold them, but beaver definitely takes the cake for that. So, when you think an animal is orphaned, this is a really good scenario to run through your head. So if the animals in question are crying incessantly, this would go for baby raccoons. They're very noisy, and quite often the baby raccoons are crying at the top of their lungs, and mama is sleeping in a tree, down the road. She will leave those babies for extended periods of time, and as they get older, she will leave them longer. So that crying has to be incessant. It has to be for a full night. Not if they're crying for half an hour or an hour or even an hour and a half. It has to be longer than that. At any point when you see eyes closed babies leaving the nest, we see that a lot with baby squirrels and baby cottontails, then we know they're in distress because they would not normally do that. They would only do that if they have a problem. For baby squirrels, their heads are quite a bit larger than the rest of their body, and of course the nests are up in the trees. So unfortunately, we see a lot of baby squirrels that have fallen from the tree, and they unfortunately fall head first, fall flat on their face, and broken teeth and broken jaws are very common in those guys. So if you do see a baby squirrel on the ground, it is something that you should look for, make sure that they don't have a bloody nose going on. And then, dehydration is a good example right here. This is a very, very dehydrated baby squirrel. I spend quite a bit of time researching blood levels and urine levels and deciding at what point, because that data doesn't exist for a lot of wildlife species, at what point, when there's indicators of organ failure, are the animals beyond saving? Because we were, and wildlife rehabilitators in general, we're trying to keep these animals alive when really their organs were so badly damaged that they would never be okay. So I did that research in-house because we see enough of these guys. And so this is physically, just by looking at it, beyond help. So this animal is in full kidney failure here, and there's no chance that it will survive. Low body temperature is another one. Excessive parasites. All animals have fleas and ticks and mites and lice. That's normal. It has to be excessive for it to be a problem. We saw a coyote pup this year came in, kind of a teenager, and he specifically came in. We didn't really know what was wrong with him until I looked at his ears. In each ear, he had over 200 ticks. And it was causing him so much distress that it looked like he had neurological issues. I had to manually remove most of those ticks, and then the remainder we did with drugs. And he slept for 36 hours after that happened. I don't know if it was causing noise in his head because they were all in his ears, but he was just so tired, he just slept and slept and slept and slept. And then it took him a long time to recover from that, but he did, and he was just a few weeks ago he was released back into the wild. So sunken eyes is another one, and when the animals are extraordinarily lethargic. So those are some indicators. You would have to match a couple just to make sure that these animals are truly orphaned. So Virginia opossum, it's an animal that I am particularly very fond of because they do everything different than most mammals, and I mean everything different. So they are North America's only marsupial. They have a prehensile tail and opposable thumbs on all four feet, and they have the most teeth of any North American mammal. Another cool fact is that they are immune to most kinds of snake venom. Where they originate from, their mainstay in their diet is snakes, and they can quite happily munch on venomous snakes without any negative effects to them. They are very, very old at age 4, and don't usually live a lot longer than that. It is one of those animals that we have animals come in, and you just look at the animal and you can tell that they're geriatric, and you can't fix that. Because they are marsupials, and it's kind of interesting, so they give birth to like 30, 38 babies after 8-day gestation, and they have the grand total of 17 nipples. So out of those 30, 38 babies, 17 find a nipple, they swallow the nipple in the pouch, and the rest are done. They don't survive. And so those babies sit in that pouch for a good 4 to 6 weeks when they kind of get to be old enough to start occasionally leaving that pouch. So when these opossums get hit by car, every year we see a lot of them where the babies are still alive in the pouch because they're very well cushioned in there with all the organs in there. So if you do see a fresh opossum by the side of the road that is dead, it doesn't hurt to turn the opossum over just to make sure that there's no live babies in that pouch. It's a pretty horrific way to die, in my opinion, and there's a lot we can do. So this is a tiny neonate baby opossum, and that's one that's a little bit older, and then this is what the pouch would look like. So I get a lot of calls and a lot of questions, and one of them always is, like, how do we know if the opossum is a boy or a girl? So this is the baby, this is the mama opossum with babies in the pouch. Male opossums also have a pouch much like men have nipples. They don't really serve a purpose, but they're there. So male opossums do have a pouch, you can tell. However, you cannot mistake a male opossum for what he is, because for some reason, and I don't actually know why, their testicles are bright blue, like blue. So you can't miss the difference between a male and a female as soon as you turn one over. Orphan baby birds, also we see a lot of them. And sometimes I get calls and people say, well, you know, the naked little baby birds fell from the nest. They've been waiting for the mother to come and retrieve it. Most birds, it's a 2-parent household. Different a little bit with some of the waterfowl, but a 2-parent household, so it's not just the mom, it's mom and dad. But also, if you think about it, birds don't have the right body parts to pick up their babies. So when it comes to baby birds that fall out of the nest, particularly if they don't have feathers yet, human assistance is required at this point. It's the only way. So we spend a lot of time every year returning, particularly birds of prey, back to the nest when they come out when they're not supposed to. We have a special team of actually firefighters that help us with that in their time off. And so, you know, but also baby songbirds can be returned to the nest. The really cool thing about a lot of birds is that, contrary to popular belief, they don't have a sense of smell. You're all naturalists, you probably know this. But they don't have a sense of smell with the exception of vultures. And so they don't even know that you've touched their babies. So that's already not so relevant. But they're very sound-oriented. So if a robin is flying around in their territory and they hear a baby robin crying for food, they will feed it. So even if you can't get the baby to the nest, if you can make a nest and put it as close to the original nest location as you can, the parents will continue to feed the baby. We utilize this sometimes because we will cross foster. If I have baby robins in my care and I happen to have a nesting robin with babies in our yard, then I will give them some extra babies because they don't care. They don't know if they have 5 or 4 or 3 babies. So a couple more doesn't hurt. And so if those baby birds are out of the nest make a nest, put it as close to the original nest location as you can, and they will feed it. Because if you think about it, at some point these baby birds are going to fledge, and they're kind of flying around and hopping around, and the parents can still find them on the ground. They find them through sound. So the sound those baby birds make is very, very important. And then there is awesome birds, barn swallows being the awesome birds in this case, that will raise almost anything that somewhat resembles them. I love barn swallows because we get some really sensitive species, and sometimes aerial insectivores are the most difficult species of birds to raise because their diet is very specific. And so if we have aerial insectivore birds in, barn swallows are phenomenal at raising them. So they will raise tree swallows, no problem. This year we had chimney swifts in, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a lot of work. The barn swallows did an awesome job at raising the chimney swifts to fledgling point, in which case I brought them back in, and they fledged, in the chimney, and then were returned to the location where they were from to make migration. So, they're awesome. I love barn swallows. So, it's just something to give some consideration to. The other thing is, if a baby bird is fully feathered and it's on the ground, it really doesn't need your help unless it is obviously sick or injured. Fledglings are normal. I get too many calls from people going, well, the baby blue jay is on the ground, but the neighbor has a cat. I cannot possibly take in all the baby fledgling birds because the neighbor has a cat or something of that nature, or you're not willing to keep your dog in. It's one of those, they need to go through that process, and we need to either keep the cats indoors, or sometimes if they are in harm's way, you can pick them up and put them on a tree branch. But those guys really don't need help; they just need to be left with their parents. Turtles, Coot's Paradise. You guys know all about turtles. So if you do see a turtle, help it cross in the direction it's going. Don't turn it around. Don't translocate it. I get those calls a lot. Well, I saw a turtle, and we have an awesome pond on our property, so I drove 30 kilometers with the turtle and put it in our pond. It's very confusing for them. Turtles are essentially born with a geographic map in their head of the area that they live in. So if you translocate a turtle, it gets very confusing. That point was really driven home for me. On the edge of the Grand River in Caledonia, they built a humongous big subdivision. And the land that they built the subdivision on has traditionally always been turtle nesting sites. And when the subdivision was just built, I got endless calls from people going, they had turtles wandering around aimlessly through the subdivision. And I got angry calls from people because their photographs were getting dug up. But there was also a lot of turtles simply aimlessly wandering around. They could not find their way back to the river because where there was never any houses, there was now houses, and they had really a very difficult time adapting to that. So they definitely know the terrain, and if you translocate them to a different location, they're going to follow the map in their head, but it now no longer matches the terrain, so it causes a lot of stress for them. I've already mentioned not to be a traffic hazard, and then during the months of May, roughly to July, if you do see a breeding age turtle dead on the road, we do hatch those. We recover eggs and hatch them. So this year we hatched over 2,000 turtle eggs, and they were all from turtles that were either killed or euthanized. We generally work with a lot of agencies. So Hamilton Animal Services is one of our partners. Burlington Animal Control is one of our partners, and the list goes on and on and on. And during these months, aside from bringing us wildlife year-round, all of these agencies help us collect dead turtles. And so sometimes it's pretty. Our summer students this year, it was so bad it was funny. We spend hours and hours opening up turtles and removing eggs, and like I said, I had to scramble because we were running out of incubator space. Scramble getting another large reptile incubator on top of the 5 that we already have. So over 2,000 eggs hatched of various turtle species, and all returned to where they were from. Another key point is if you do find an injured turtle, please do not transport it in a container with water. Logic might dictate that you need to, but they can actually drown. They do need to come up for air. So if they have injuries that prevent them from lifting their head out of the water, they can very easily drown. So Rubbermaid totes are fantastic for transporting turtles in, but please don't put any water in during transportation. So this is a question I probably get asked the most. So how do you pick up a snapping turtle? So you literally put one hand underneath and you pick it up like a tray of drinks, and then you use your other hand to balance the turtle on your hand. This one was it's kind of funny. This was a 35-kilo turtle that I'm holding there. And my husband is here, Dave. He was taking this picture, and I was literally standing there going, please take this picture. I need to put this turtle down. So this is a very healthy turtle. This turtle actually swallowed a fish hook. And the gentleman who was fishing, whose hook he swallowed, realized what had happened, brought the turtle ashore, cut the line, contacted the local humane society to come and get him, who called me, and so we ended up with this turtle. And we had past experience, so there was actually one of my veterinarian friends invented a technique for surgically removing hooks from turtles in awkward locations. And so we used his technique, and within a week and a half, this turtle was back to where he needed to be, minus the fish hook. So that was kind of was quite the thing. It doesn't always happen like that. One of the key things is, regardless of what you see on TV or what Google tells you, never pick a turtle up by its tail. It would be the equivalent of picking your dog up by its tail, which is something you just simply wouldn't do because it hurts. So here we go, fish hooks. We see it a lot. If you do fish, some stuff to keep in mind. This poor turtle here was similar to the size of the turtle on the previous slide. So that turtle weighed 35 kilos. This turtle weighed 7 kilos. And he came to us. He was sitting on the banks of the Grand River, just sitting and wouldn't really move. So he was picked up by a humane society. And he came to us, and I was looking at this turtle, and other than foam bubbling from its mouth, which made me suspect an upper respiratory infection, I couldn't really find anything wrong with it until we x-rayed it. So you might also be sitting too far, but right there you can see a fish hook. There was no line sticking out of his mouth, but there was definitely a fish hook in this turtle, and it was sitting right at the base of his esophagus, where the esophagus meets the stomach. So it was preventing food from going into the stomach. And frankly, the turtle was having trouble swallowing saliva. So from a turtle from 35 kilos to go down to 7 kilos would take about 2 years of starvation. So that turtle already had that fish hook in there for an extended period of time. Interestingly enough, the manufacturers of fish hook claim they're biodegradable. I would argue they're not, because they would have already dissolved, but it didn't. Unfortunately, we couldn't operate on that turtle right away. So it took over 2 years for that turtle because he had to gain weight, he had to feel a lot better. So it took over 2 years for that turtle to gain enough weight, have surgery. It was not the turtle the surgery was invented for. That was a turtle the surgery was invented for. And have the fish hook removed and get that turtle on antibiotics and feeling good enough for its release. So like I mentioned, this is a small snapping turtle, found sort of in the same shape as this guy, just a little smaller, sitting on the edge of the Grand River, not feeling very well. It was all the Grand River, because this map turtle also came from the Grand River. But it had very clearly swallowed a fish hook because there was fish line sticking out of his mouth. And then there was this incident, and the fisher lady, I think it was very distraught when she brought this up. So she actually captured it after this happened. So my request is, if you do fish and a turtle takes your bait, which is very possible, please don't just cut your line and let this turtle swim off, because it will kill them. It just kills them very slowly. Snakes. I'm speaking to naturalists, so I'm hoping we all love snakes. So we have 17 awesome species of snakes in Ontario. Only one of those is venomous. If you are not a fan of snakes, or if you are fearful of snakes, could we please not make young people fearful of snakes? People aren't born afraid of snakes, they are made afraid of snakes. So I really think if you are scared of snakes, that's okay. Just please don't project your fear on people. One of the things that I really want to bring up is this one. So I cannot tell you how many people have told me after I've done a talk, well, I saw this snake by the side of the road and it was injured, but I figured you couldn't do anything, so I just moved it off to the side. There's actually a lot we can do. We've done full-on surgeries on snakes and all sorts of other things. Plus, a lot of our snakes are on the endangered species list. And so, helping out snakes, it's very important. I am champion toad leg splinter, so I can definitely help a snake. It's kind of funny. No wildlife rehabilitator in Ontario would help this lady with a toad that she had hit with the lawnmower, and I said, if I help baby squirrels, I will help a toad. So she brought it out, and she hadn't really said much about it. She drove a long way, and it wasn't a toad, it was a toad. And he had a broken leg. I managed to splint the leg properly, had him on pain medication and antibiotics for 2 weeks. The leg healed beautifully, and she came and picked up the toad and released it back in her yard. So if I can fix a toad, I can fix the snake. And if I can't fix the snake, I can humanely euthanize the snake so that it's not laying by the side of the road dying. If you need to contain a snake, it's best done in a cloth bag, like a pillowcase. And I do request that, however much I am opposed to translocating wildlife, moving snakes out of harm's way is just one of those things that is required. I do it quite readily and willingly. If somebody calls me in a panic because they have a snake either in their yard or their house, I will go and get it. And so when I just got to be a wildlife custodian, I got a call from a local farmer who was moving a wood pile, and he told me there were snakes in his wood pile, and he was fearful of snakes and hated them with a passion. And he says, you either come and get these snakes or I'm going to kill them. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not supposed to relocate snakes, or wildlife in general, what do I do? So I called my friend who's a conservation officer, and I go, what do I do? And he said, oh, just go get the snakes and move them somewhere safe. Rather moved a little ways than killed. I spent the whole afternoon moving this gentleman's wood pile, and there was a grand total of 47 milk snakes in this wood pile. So I captured all 47, making sure I had them all, so I had this giant pile of snakes in my car. And he was the farmer, so he was a landowner. So I moved them to a fence row, literally one fence row over, less than a kilometer from his house, where there was a lot of downed trees and logs in the fence row. And so that was reasonably okay habitat for snakes, so that's where they were released, and that means they were not dead. So if snakes need to be moved because somebody is that afraid, let's move them if you are not afraid. Otherwise, give me a call. I get about 60 or so calls a year for Massasauga rattlesnakes in people's homes, and to date, it's never been one. So, I'd be really excited if there was one. I do actually handle venomous snakes, but to date, it has not been one. I have taken fox snakes and hognose snakes out of people's homes, which is cool, but it has not been a Massasauga rattlesnake. So when you do encounter injured wildlife, it is important to remember that they need professional help right away. I get too many phone calls from people saying, well, I picked up an injured raccoon, it was hit by a car, I put it in my garage overnight, and I figure if it's still alive in the morning, I'll call for help. I'm having a hard time reconciling the logic in that because I don't think there is any. It'd be the equivalent of, well, saw this guy get hit by a car, I threw him in the back of my vehicle, took him home, put him in the garage. If he's alive in the morning, maybe I'll call the doctor. Pain management is crucial to the survival. The sooner we can help this animal not hurt, the better it is. It is so crucial that for many years, turtles were not surviving rehabilitation, and nobody could figure out why. Until not that long ago, somebody got smart and gave them some pain medication. And suddenly, turtles started surviving rehabilitation, and simply they can't handle pain that well. And when you're a turtle, you're pretty stoic, so it isn't obviously that you're injuring. If we're in pain, we scream, and turtle can't sort of, do the same thing. So the whole concept of pain medication wasn't thought of. So it's very, very important. And like I mentioned before, if those injuries are so bad that the animal cannot survive it, the sooner we can euthanize these animals, the less they suffer. So I do think that's very important. The other thing to remember is our presence, as well as the presence of your dog and potentially cat, is very stressful to wildlife. Just our sound, our smell, our touch, it causes stress. So if we can minimize that while they are in our care, we get endless phone calls and random people showing up at our place, sometimes asking to see the animals, sometimes demanding to see the animals that we have in care. That's a no. Not only are we under legal obligation to not have people visit the wildlife in our care, logic would dictate all the animals we have in care are wild, they are sick, they are injured, they really don't want to see people, it stresses them out. We keep our own presence at an absolute minimum. Having, a bunch of people trucking through there is really not helpful. Never was it brought home to me as much as it was a few years ago. I had a phone call from the OPP that there was a deer hit by car not far from my house, and he was a younger guy, and he asked for my assistance. So I got there before he did because it was close to my house, and there was a lady there, and she was sitting down with the deer and was holding the deer's head in her lap, and she was petting it and talking to it. And I could see, working with deer, the deer was having an internal freak out, but because it had a very obviously fractured spine, it couldn't run away. I'm sure it wanted to, but couldn't. So I very kindly introduced myself to the lady and asked her to please step away from the deer because my plan was to cover its head, reducing sound and making it dark, hoping to reduce its stress. I had to, when it comes to a deer hit by car, I would have to wait for OPP to get there before the animal can be dispatched. So I had to wait for the officer to get there. I knew he was on the way. Well, the lady started first telling me that she was a Reiki master. And I actually didn't, I know now, I didn't know what that meant. And so I was trying to explain to her that she really needed to step away from the deer, and she started yelling and screaming at me. I learned that day a very important lesson: you cannot reason with irate people. Because of course I was standing there trying my best to explain the situation to her, and she wasn't getting it. She just got more agitated. I could have hugged the OPP officer when he came on scene because he took one look at what was going on and ordered the lady to get in her car and leave, and if she didn't, she would be charged with obstruction. So he was brilliant, and she left, all the while screaming profanities at us. But anyways, we were able to put the poor deer out of his misery, and yes, the deer was donated to First Nations. The other thing to remember is if it's been in a cat's mouth, it's going to need antibiotics. It doesn't matter if the skin is broken or not. Cat saliva is very lethal to wildlife. They often carry Pasteurella bacteria in their saliva. So if the animal got drooled on, which if the cat's been trying to bite it, it's going to have to be drooled on, and they clean themselves, they will ingest the saliva and then they will die several days after the fact. So if it's been in a cat's mouth, by default, as soon as somebody says, well, my cat had it, it needs to come in. We put them on antibiotics for a week to prevent the Pasteurella infection from taking hold. So this is my master plan for if you need to contain any animals. Make sure you have a plan ready. Make sure that people around you know what you're about to do. Utilize some of the people around you if you need to in situations where stuff like this is going on. People really appreciate it if somebody takes the lead, and they will very readily respond if people tell them what to do. Make sure that you have the appropriate protective gear. If you do not have the appropriate, think bald eagle, don't attempt it. I'd much rather have somebody wait with an animal, wait for me to get there with appropriate gear, than try and make a rescue attempt and end up in the hospital. We had a fluke storm, roughly March, I think it was this year, and we had a bunch of international, no, it was last year, we had a bunch of international students, and we had a loon come in. And I said, oh, this is kind of cool because this is the bird of Ontario, and it's a loon, and we don't see them very often, so this is cool. Anyways, because of the storm, there must have been a bunch of loons blown off course. We had 27 come in 2 weeks. And 3 of the finders had to go to hospital because they were trying to handle an animal that shouldn't, because loons are very good at stabbing things. And so my point is, if you don't know how to handle the animal, or you do not have the appropriate gear, don't do it. Make sure that you're quick. If you're going to pick up that snapping turtle, when you resolve that you're going to do it, do it. If you hesitate, you're going to get bit. Be quiet. If you can keep talking to a minimum, and if you're transporting the wild animals, keep the radio off in your car. Make it dark. Just throw a towel over the crate or something similar to that. And make sure that whatever container the animal is in is appropriate for the species. Raccoons are super smart, and they have these tiny little hands. Raccoons in plastic dog crates or even mesh dog crates do not go together because they can bend the mesh if they need to, and their little hands fit through everything, and I've watched them. they'll just reach and they'll just sit and undo all the bolts and things that hold these crates together until they get out. We have two different types of stainless steel cages that are supposed to be like escape proof. Raccoons can get out of both. We had a seized raccoon come in, a request for us to take a seized raccoon that had been someone's pet for 2 years. And we had a friend that lived near there, she's a vet tech, and I said, hey, can you transport this raccoon for us? And it was about a 2-hour drive, and she says, oh yeah, that's not a problem. So the raccoon was in a plastic dog crate. And about halfway through her drive, I got a panicky phone call. The raccoon had disassembled the crate and had crawled through the back of her van, and because he had been somebody's pet, he had been taken for car rides on a regular basis, and he popped up in the passenger seat, sat down beside her, and went, so she was very panicky about it. I happen to know that the guy that had this raccoon as a pet used to take him through the drive-thru at Tim Hortons on a daily basis, and he would get Timbits. So I told her, go to Tim Hortons, get Timbits, keep this guy entertained with Timbits. In the meantime, go buy some zip ties. So with the use of Timbits, she got the raccoon back in the crate, which she had put back together, and she zip tied her out of that crate so that the raccoon would stay in there. But if that had not been somebody's pet raccoon, I would have ended very badly. Raccoons are insanely aggressive, and they're really not very kind about being contained. So it just was, the luck would have it that it was, I probably would have thought of a different way of transporting, and I would have probably warned her had it been not a pet raccoon. The other key thing is, please don't feed the animal. If you put it in there, I can't take it out anymore. When you get hit by a car or when you're sick, food is not a priority. You remember the picture of the very dehydrated baby squirrel? The very worst thing you can do for that poor animal is feed it. Dave and I keep a list going of all the weird things people have fed wildlife. And we had a northern flicker no, it was a pigeon somebody had fed. It was a baby pigeon somebody had fed grapefruit, which was high up there. Baby squirrels getting fed almond milk, those kind of things. And it was logical because it's milk of almonds. The gentleman explained it to me. Almond milk, milk of almonds, baby squirrels eat nuts, therefore almond milk was the ideal food. Our biggest fear, Dave and I both, is breast milk. We've had, the last 2 years, we see it more and more. We get baby wildlife that's been fed breast milk, and it always comes with a little bottle, like, here. I don't want your breast milk. But realistically, an animal that is emaciated and dehydrated doesn't need food. An animal that's been hit by a car, believe me, does not need food. Birds of prey is another one. Please don't feed them. You will kill them. Hamburger will kill them. Chicken breasts, not a good idea. Birds of prey are very easily, we get a lot of them in, particularly this time of year, youngsters that have left mom and dad that are grounded because they have not been able to hunt successfully. The worst thing you can do is feed them. We put them on interosseous fluids for like 48 hours before we even contemplate giving them anything to eat because they will die. So please do not feed the animals. When you find them sick, injured, or orphaned, don't feed them, please. Plus, if I need to anesthetize an animal, I prefer they don't have food in their stomach. It's just easier if they're not regurgitating it into their, trachea and all that fun stuff. Wildlife are protected by law. They are protected federally and they're protected provincially, and there's all these laws. So provincially, they're protected under the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act. And I condensed the several thousand counting document into 3 sentences. It's illegal to be in possession of wildlife without permits. We have the permits. It's illegal to relocate wildlife, so the distance is 1 kilometer. So if you trap a raccoon in your yard, you can relocate it for 1 kilometer, no further. You can imagine that raccoon is going to be back in your yard before you have a chance to get back to your yard. So rather than focusing on relocating these animals, we really urge people to focus on deterring them from being there. If your yard is not a pleasant place, they are not going to be there. And unfortunately, that sometimes means taking down your bird feeders for a while, because that attracts wildlife like mad. Aside from birds, it will attract rabbits and rats and all these other creatures, which in turn will attract skunks and opossums and raccoons, which will attract coyotes, and then, whole hell breaks loose. So, if we can make your yard unpleasant, the solar powered floodlights are like ideal because it's really random to a wild animal. We know it's motion that sets them off, but the animal doesn't know that. So please deter rather than relocate. And it's also illegal to harass wildlife. Wildlife photographers, you cannot harass wildlife. It is an offense under the law. And it gets forgotten sometimes. Snowy owl eruption, I think we're kind of used to snowy owls right now, so it's not as big of a craze as it was. People were literally harassing these poor owls so bad that they would fly into oncoming traffic, trying to get away from people. So please do not harass wildlife. If you do find an injured or orphaned or sick animal, you have 24 hours to find it help. After that, it becomes an offense under the law. That you mean well does not absolve you from breaking the law. So you still, because that's what people go, oh, well, but I don't plan to keep it. But it doesn't matter. 24 hours after that, it's an offense under the law. So these are my public servants announcements. Google does not have the answers. If you are a naturalist, you can totally sympathize with me, because there is, so for every website that has something good on it, there's like 100 that have like stupid things on there. By default, any website in North America that has do-it-yourself advice on there is wrong, because you cannot legally have wildlife anywhere in North America. So what do you need wildlife rehabilitation information for? It's illegal to be in possession of these animals. Do-it-yourself wildlife rehabilitation is self-serving and not in the best interest of the animal. The animal is in better hands with somebody who is skilled and capable, or particularly like conspecific interaction is an important one. So if we can, we obviously always have multiples of everything. So if you have a single baby squirrel, I would say it's better to be raised in, being in company of other baby squirrels than just by yourself. I hate polysporin. Polysporin does not fix broken bones, and that sounds really funny, and it's more a euphemism than anything else. But people really try to fix broken bones with polysporin, like open fractures with polysporin and degloving with polysporin. Is why I hate polysporin so much. Puppy milk replacer is for puppies, not for baby squirrels and baby raccoons and baby cottontails. Kitten milk replacer is for kittens. The milk replacers that we use are all custom formulated to, as closely as possible, meet the nutritional requirements of the species that we have in care. Puppy milk replacer and kitten milk replacer, you can keep wildlife alive on it sometimes, depending on the species, but you can't get them to be healthy on it. So, keeping alive versus raising a healthy animal is a huge difference. The other one that we get a lot, raising orphaned wildlife at home illegally, is not a good learning experience for your children, no matter what you might think. People tell me this all the time, oh, we thought it was a good learning experience for your children. As a matter of fact, today, we dealt with somebody that had an opossum in their care since May of this year, and it was raised with their children. They treated it like a dog. And the gentleman actually called the Ministry of Natural Resources to ask them which veterinarian could spay this opossum. He got ordered to get the opossum to me, and he was given 12 hours. After that, he would be charged. The kids were crying their eyes out in our driveway, and both adults were crying their eyes out in our driveway. I don't think that was a good experience for those children. The other thing is, if you contract rabies, you will die. Once you start showing symptoms of rabies, there is nothing they can do for you in the hospital. They will actually put you in an induced coma until you die, because the symptoms are so brutal. So please do not touch rabies vector species. Right now, if somebody has touched a raccoon, and I mean the babies are a little bit bigger now, but this summer, if a human has touched a baby raccoon without wearing gloves, the health unit orders the animal euthanized and sent for rabies testing. And there is nothing I or anyone else can do about it. That's a fact. Because of the risk of rabies is there, and we cannot, obviously we have to protect human lives, but rabies testing can only be done post-mortem. So by not touching some of these rabies vector species and calling in a Humane Society or SPCA or animal control officer, you're actually preventing these animals from having to be euthanized. So please do not mess with rabies vector species. So how can you help? And you all already do this. I do ask that you stop liking and sharing and commenting on social media posts that involve wildlife in non-wild or unnatural situations. You know, dogs cuddled up with baby deer, you know, like those kind of things. They're not natural, however cute the pictures might look, or however cute those videos are of the polar bears hugging, you know, huskies and that kind of thing. Please, let's not encourage people to create these videos because it's just not good for the wildlife. Be an advocate for wildlife living wild and help educate others on this. So if your neighbor finds these baby squirrels, please advise them on what the proper thing to do is. Planting native species and plants and flowers in your yard. Supporting habitat restoration and protection, which you all do. Be respectful of the personal space of wildlife. Fishing and hunting lead-free. We are seeing a lot of lead-related occurrences, and lead poisoning is really horrific. And clean up after yourself so that we have reduced amounts of fishing line, straws, balloons, ice caplets, terrible, in the environment. Those are just things that we take in, you know, out of wildlife all the time. Skunks get their heads stuck in those ice caplets because they try to go in the cup, and then when they come out, they're stuck. You know, fishing line entanglement is endless, straws, balloons, and overall just be an advocate for wildlife and help educate people. And I finish with, remember I was fanatical about wildlife living wild. When we return wild animals to nature, we merely return them to what is already theirs, for men cannot give wild animals freedom, they can only take it away. I wish I was that eloquent, I'm not. It was Jacques Cousteau's son who said this. And with that, if anybody has any questions, I would happily answer them. Or try. Yes. We are located in Haldeman County, Jarvis area, rurally, in the middle of nowhere, kind of. So yeah, so you can imagine if we cover that large an area, it's Haldeman County. Yes. Oh, I did promise to explain it. So Hobbitstee is, I'm originally from Holland. I was born and raised there, and I came to Canada when I was 19. So Hobbitstee means House of a Hobbit in Dutch. So it does have some relation to Lord of the Rings. Any other questions? Those were easy questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you hatch out turtle eggs, do you have any thoughts or comments when you let those young go? What mental impact they have when
they go back to where they come from, so that all the containers of turtle eggs are marked. And so we look for the absolute closest suitable habitat to the location where the mother was found. So that's the best we can do. So that's how we do it. It's maybe not ideal, but it's the best we can do. Ma'am. From exposure, so the incubation period of rabies can be, depending on the species, can be around 6 weeks. So rather long. And then once they start showing symptoms, they are dead within a day or two. But if your pet is adequately vaccinated, which is like please vaccinate your dogs and cats, they will recommend if they've been in contact with, let's say, a raccoon, the health unit recommends, or CFIA recommends, that you have your animal boosted by your veterinarian with the rabies vaccine, and then they should be reasonably okay. So myself, I am rabies vaccinated, so if I get bitten or or think I might have gotten bitten by a raccoon or a skunk or an animal that we think potentially could have rabies. Similar for me, I have to get boosted. And then they will still send the animal for rabies testing. But a dog, you might not necessarily have the animal to send for rabies testing. So then they recommend that you go to your veterinarian and have them booster. But definitely report. And so for animal to wildlife interactions, it's OMAFRA in Ontario. And with human to human, it's your health unit. And CFIA is the one that does the testing, unless there is no contact, and then it's the Ministry of Natural Resources. It's really complicated. Any other questions?
What about the ones that can't be back? Let's say it's imprinted. Let's say like this one that was a pet.
So in my 12 or so years that I've been doing this, 2 animals have gone for educational purposes. The ones that are not able to be released back into the wild get humanely euthanized. And that is simply, I usually use a bald eagle for this analogy. If you are a bald eagle and you've had the opportunity to fly free, and you injure a wing, which prevents you from flying, therefore you will never live free again, quality of life to sit on a perch for the next 40 years, for me, isn't there. We don't need another bird like a bald eagle in captivity because there is human like captive bred human imprints that make way better educational animals than a wild-born animal ever would be. So for me, the quality of life isn't there. The exceptions for me, one was a screech owl that had a neurological deficit that made him not afraid of people. He also was visually impaired. He lives at Moundsburg right now. The other one was a turkey vulture youngster that people had interfered with a lot, and he had become quite imprinted on humans. And we tried to recover him from that. We tried releasing him twice. The first time he flew one concession over and sat on my neighbor's deck for a week. And finally, after a week, my neighbor called and he goes, "Weirdest thing, we've got this turkey vulture," and he just sits on our deck and he goes, "I'm a little unnerved by it." So I knew exactly what it was. I went and got him. And the second time we released him, he went and did a similar thing at an apartment building. He sat in somebody's car. And so he is at the Way Marsh. He is perfectly healthy. I actually have a contract with the guy who manages the birds there that because the bird is perfectly healthy, he gets flown free, no tether, nothing. He gets free flown every single day of his life. Whether he is performing or not, he gets free flown. He doesn't do tricks. The only thing that he does is he shows how he hovers, so he free flies for his education purposes, and then they hide food all around the area where people sit, and so they show off his amazing sense of smell in locating food. And so he doesn't do tricks because I don't really like that. So I just find that we have so many animals in captivity already. Most of them are captive bred human imprints. We don't need to use wild-born animals because if they've known wild, I think captivity is a pretty poor substitute. But, opinions vary on this. Yes?
What's happening with these turtles that you said have to cross subdivision now?
It's a mess. It's a mess. Every year it's a mess. It's a disaster every single year. It's year 3 now, and the turtles still don't get it. So a lot of lives lost, I can tell you that, like tremendous lives lost. The farmer whose land was expropriated for that knew the turtle nesting habits for that specific field, and he was taking it into account. He was quite a bit older. I've known the man for years, and it's breaking his heart. So it's a mess, but it's the cost of doing business, I guess. Development versus environment. Yes, ma'am. We are funded by private donations, and we have about 2 corporations that donate annually. Sir? Yes. The young offenders and adult offenders are generally court-ordered. Instead of being incarcerated for their sentence, they can choose to do community service sometimes, or sometimes they specifically get ordered to do community service. We are small, And we specifically tend to get the adult and young offenders that have a lot of mental health issues, that cannot do community service in a place where there is a lot of people that they have to interact with. And so for us, it's been a really amazing experience, actually. Some of the turnarounds that we have seen, and the impact for each individual is very different, for some it is a tremendous impact, for others it's just something fun. For the youth particularly, because we also work with at-risk youth, which tend to come to us through child and youth services, the impact is really great because I generally get them to do a few things, and I'll allow them to have their picture taken while they're holding a hawk or something of that nature. It gives them bragging rights. They can brag about something that very few other people ever got to do. And rather than bragging about what car they stole, they can brag about the hawk. They tend to become extraordinarily passionate about it, which is it's really great to see. Like, it's really good to see. The other thing that we've been very lucky with, particularly with our young offenders, I'm finding that a lot of those kids don't know what they like and what they're good at because they haven't been given the opportunities. So we work very hard at giving them different opportunities because there's so many different things that need to be done. Some are really great with working with the animals, others are not. And so we also have building projects that we do all the time. And 2 years ago, we had tremendous help from the Hamilton Carpenters Union, and we had they built us a large flight cage for our bird of prey, and it was quite the project. And I had asked them in advance if it was okay if some of the young offenders would work alongside them just for a learning experience. And the guys were really great with these young offenders, and 2 of the kids ended up getting apprenticeships through the Carpenters Union. So whatever it takes, some are really artistic, making birdhouses that get painted pretty. I'm good with that. Whatever floats your boat. So that's really our goal. Like, whatever you like or love. I'm just finding a lot of them are just happy to be outside and doing something. It's meaningful activities is what it's called. You know, sort of in the psychiatrist's mouth. It's stuff that they enjoy, like building something that then in turn the wildlife they see it get used. Things like that really affect them greatly. Oh, more questions, sir.
I just wondered how much land does this take?
It's kind of a painful question right now because we're really short land. So we're managing with 1 acre, and it's really we're managing, but it's really not good enough. So our long-term plan right now is, it's going to take us a little bit, is buying our next door neighbor's farm, which would give us 40 acres. And I'm really wanting a swamp. I want a swamp. And my neighbor's land is really poor farming land, but part of it is swamp. The reason I want the swamp is because we currently, long-term beaver rehabilitation is a problem because we don't have a swamp. So once we have the swamp, we can actually raise these baby beavers. Right now we can raise them for a bit, and then we have to send them to another rehab facility to own the swamp. So once we have the 40 acres, we would have enough land, and we would never need more. So that's our goal, but we need to raise $500,000. So if anybody has any great ideas about how to do that, I'm all ears because it's tough. But yeah, yes.
Supplementary question: how do you cure beavers from eating corn?
Probably not. I've actually watched. I was plowing a field. I have a farm background. I was plowing a field a few years ago, helping out a friend. And I was watching the beavers actually take down the corn in the field next and, cutting it down like they would a tree. And they were trying to dam the creek using corn. And they were very frustrated because it kept floating away. It was fantastic to watch, but I don't think you can cure them from eating corn. They're going to, unfortunately. As one of my farmer friends says, it's the cost of doing business. It's part of, we took their land. And to give back, you're going to have a certain percentage of crop loss to wildlife. One more question. Who's got the best? Ma'am, I haven't heard from you.
Are there any endangered critters that we cannot?
The only species we cannot legally have is bears. So that would be the exception. However, if a bear got injured in Hobbitstee eventually send it somewhere, but that's the only animal that I cannot legally be in possession of. Other than that, it's kind of bizarre because we raise big wolves and things like that, and we raise bald eagles and take care of bald eagles and coyotes, and it's a little conflicting sometimes, in your head to think about it, but that's how it works. Yes.
So if someone does want to donate, what's the best way to do so?
We can take money in every which way and form, including recently, I was interested in your talk there, we just recently had some stocks donated, which was a first for me, so I'm still learning that, we can accept them as well. Mail a check, bring cash, we have, on our website, there's online donation available, or you can donate via PayPal, or e-transfer, so it's like every which way you can get rid of money, you can give it money.
Well, it sounds like it's a very worthy cause. It sounds like you do tremendous work for wildlife in our region, and it's not $500,000, but we would like to thank you for coming here tonight on behalf of the Naturalist Club. Chantal, thank you so much.